Well, here we are looking ahead to the 36th edition of the America's Cup, and it all gets underway in earnest with the one-off World Series warm-up event next week out there in New Zealand. And as you can see, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by a member of Team Ineos, David Freddie Carr. You were saying off camera, David, before we started, that this is a bit like a Formula One season when they all go to Barcelona to try out the new cars. But wouldn't you know it, as everybody's putting the boats in the water, you've had a problem over the last couple of days. There's not an awful lot I imagine you can do other than sit tight and wait.
Do you know, that's exactly it. We go out and we watch the other boats. We go out with designers and key sailors, go out and observe the other boats, see what the styles of racing are, look at the hardware on the other boats, and learn about the strategies, the different race courses out here in New Zealand. So it's certainly not dead time for the sailors. And we're very integrated with the design team at the moment, and it's all about the small gains. So we're looking to improve the boat speed wherever we can. And, you know, yesterday we actually got off site for the morning and went to Eden Park and had a kick around with Dan Carter, which was a lot of fun. And he shared his experiences of high pressure sporting situations and talked in great length about the Rugby World Cup final in 2015 and how he dealt with that pressure. So every cloud has a silver lining, I guess.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I know you're a sports nut as well when you're away from the water. So what was that like to be around and in the presence, listening to one of the all-time greats in rugby union?
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, we all know that New Zealand All Black side from sort of 2010 up to probably modern day is considered one of the greatest sports teams of all time. And we just had a lot of questions to him around the culture within the All Blacks and what makes his winning culture and how they work together, not only as the sort of starting 15, but the wider group. And a lot of those lessons translate over to us as a sailing team and then into the design group as well. It was a pretty good, fun morning, but it's safe to say we'll stick to sailing and not kicking rugby balls. We were useless at that.
Well, let's talk about the sailing part of this then, and the boat itself, because for those that haven't seen any of the boats in this year's America's Cup, it's not like nothing you've ever seen before. Foiling is the key this time around. For novices coming into it for the first time, tell us what we can expect.
I mean, sailing over the last 10 years has changed beyond belief. It used to happen 2 miles out at sea. The races would take 2 hours. And even as a sailing fan, I must say I found the America's Cup racing at times a little bit tedious. Now we're on short courses with boundaries, so you can see the field of play. So it's very obvious what is going on at all times. The racing is super close. The boats never get that far apart. They're always coming together. And I guess the biggest thing is the speeds. You can't ignore the speeds. The boats are doing 50 miles an hour, which is just unbelievable. And even if you followed the last America's Cup in Bermuda, where the boats were doing 30 miles an hour around the race course, these things now are doing 45, 50 miles an hour upwind. To put that in perspective, we would currently in these boats have broken the sailing speed record from about 8 years ago. And we're doing that around a race course. So it's beyond belief. I think it will blow people's minds, whether you're a sailing fan or a non-sailing fan alike.
Yeah, if you're a sports enthusiast, you can't help but be in awe of these things, because the one thing that struck me when I first saw the boat Britannia 2 was that most of the boats, when you're at full speed, isn't even in the water. We talk about these foils coming off the side of the boat. It really is advanced technology at its best, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, and there's going to be 2 games to this America's Cup. There's the top end speed. So much like, again, to go back to F1, your speed down the long straight, what can your top end speed be? But because we're on this race course with narrow boundaries, it's about your acceleration speed as well and how well you take off out of the water. To put that in perspective, when the hull is in the water, the main bit of the traditional boat that everyone knows, you're kind of dragging something about the size, the area of a tennis court through the water. We have foils off the side of the boat to lift that wetted surface area out. And when the boat pops and gets ripping, that's where the speed turns on. And it's not only about that top end speed, but it's also going to be about how early you can pop your hull out the water and get going as fast as possible.
And we mentioned the warm-up series next week. Of course, it's all about finding what the limits of your boat are, but at the same time, you don't want to give your opponents a competitive advantage come the start of the new year. So how far do you push this boat, and how much do you feel you already know about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so every boat has had 2 America's Cup boats in this cycle, but there's no doubt that everybody's second boat is that much more advanced than the first. So if you're racing the America's Cup in your first boat, you're going to have a tough time of it. So you've got this very, very complicated, important asset, but you've got to go out and push the limits and see where that boat can get to. But if you do that before the Prada Cup in the new year, then you could sustain damage that could really affect your whole challenge, your whole 4 years of work. So there is a fine line, particularly in the windy stuff, because as I said, you're doing speeds that you just wouldn't even dream about 10 years ago. But you've also got to find, as we have done in the last few days, you've got to find which bits of the kit are weak and going to let you down. So yeah, it's a real fine balancing act between pushing hard, trying to find that top end speed, but knowing when the breeze gets up a little bit, just not to do that last lap of the race course when everyone's fatigued, and try and look after your assets and bring the boat and people home safe as well.
And of course, on top of all this, you're all entitled to another set of foils. The question is, do you bring them out early, or are they going to stay under wraps when the proper racing gets into gear at the start of next year and everybody's trying to get in that America's Cup final?
Yeah, I think everybody is probably showing about 90% of their boat speed, I'd suggest at the moment. There's no doubt that every single syndicate, all 4 teams, are going to slowly implement up to the beginning of the middle of January, where they will be operating close to 100%. Maybe Team New Zealand, because they're already in the match themselves, they're already in the final effectively, they might have a bit more in the bag. But I think the racing that we'll see next week, you'll see people sailing around at sort of 90-95%, and then over the Christmas period, working up to the Challenger Series, the Prada Cup proper, you'll see the boats really, really wind up.
What's the top speed you think you can get out of this boat?
Over 50 knots for sure. Over 50 knots for sure. I think you'll see boats go close to 55s in the bear-away. So at the very top of the course, when you turn back downwind, you see high speeds. But I think that you'll see on the downwinds, you'll see boats constantly sitting over 50 knots, which is just mind-blowing in the sailing world. Considering America's Cup boats in 2007 were considered fast if they went 13 knots of boat speed. It just goes to show how far the sport's come in the last 13 years.
And in layman's terms, in terms of miles per hour, what does 50 knots equate to?
Oh yeah, you add, so 60 miles an hour. It's pretty close, basically. It's pretty close. So yeah, you'll see the boats sitting downwind at 60 miles an hour. Now, as I said, with the boundaries on the race course, you keep getting bounced into each other. So it's like 2 cars going head on at 60 miles an hour whilst trying to on a ice rink, basically. Like, it's just undescribable what it's like when those 2 boats are bow to bow coming together at a closing speed of 120 miles an hour with 11 crew on one boat, 11 crew on the other boat, having a massive game of chicken on an ice rink. That's how I'd describe it.
Well, it's quite a vivid picture you paint there, Freddie. And I was going to say, some of the pictures and footage I've seen already from you guys out there, there's been sailing sessions when it's flat calm and others when it looks choppy, to say the least. Now, you said already, these boats get quite close together when you're in competitive action. How great is that element of risk in terms of boats coming together?
Yeah, I mean, we have, like all sports, we have umpires. We have an on the water umpire that follows us in a very fast chase boat. And then we have an umpire booth back on shore, and we're governed by the rules of sailing. Now, the one thing with the skippers that will be driving these America's Cup, they're obviously Olympic champions. They've done countless America's Cups, and their boat handling and their understanding of the rules is supreme. But sometimes to get an advantage in the rules of sailing, you have to push it into the grey zone and get the boats very close. So I think that we will see extremely close crosses, extremely close ducks. And in the pre-start, so the 2-minute period before you launch onto the race course, you have a 2-minute period where you're not necessarily flat out, but you're trying to wind up onto the line as the gun goes. The 2 boats are doing kind of a dance around each other at high speed, trying to wind up onto the race course for when the clock hits 0. And that's where you'll see the really close contact, a really close engagement, should I say. So look out for that sort of pre-start, as we call it, the first 2 minutes before the race starts. And although it's not racing itself, that's where you'll definitely see some of the most exciting action.
And tell us just a little bit about your role as well, because you're what they call a grinder on the boat. There's 8 of you filling this role.
Right.
How much do you actually know about what's going on? Because you, as far as manual labour goes, you've got a fairly intensive job on that boat.
Yeah, it is hard. So we sail with 11 crew on the boat. And to break it down, Ben drives the boat, Ben Ainsley, and he drives the boat, and everything kind of goes through Ben. He's kind of your traditional skipper. Now, he works in a couple of different loops. He works in what we call the speed loop. So he'll work with the sail trimmers and the pilots. Now, the sail trimmers control the soft sails above the boat, and they're looking for the perfect shape of the sails to make the boat go as fast as possible. And the pilot is the guy who's controlling the foils. As we talked about earlier, the guy who's trying to get the boat sort of out of the water and ripping along. So between the trimmers, Ben, who's on the helm, and the pilot, they're in the speed loop. They're constantly trying to make the boat go as fast as possible. And then he's also working with our tactician, Giles Scott. Now, a tactician is the guy who doesn't really get involved in the speed side of things or putting energy into the boat. He's the guy who's looking up the race course, and he's reading the wind and the water. He's looking at his iPad, his tablet, looking for where the boundary is, looking at the other boat, and he's effectively plotting the perfect course for us around the race course. Now, the rest of us, I think that leaves about 7 of us, are grinders. So everything below the water, all of the foils are powered by batteries. So the 2 dagger boards and the rudder are powered by a battery. All of the sails above the hull are powered by muscles, basically. So we have 7 grinders who are moving winches and hydraulic pumps, and we're moving the sails really dynamically, pumping the sails, trying to get the boat go as fast as possible. And the grinders also, as well as putting the power down, they also have small little jobs on the boat to kind of trim different parts of the boat to make the boat go faster. So we're not dynamically moving stuff, but we're just making sure that our little area of the boat is perfectly trimmed to get those last 1 or 2% of boat speed.
And looking forward to next week, obviously the World Series event starts on Thursday. You've lost these couple of days of practice whilst you try and iron out a few technical issues. Are you still on track? Are you where you'd like to be at this stage?
I think you are where you'd like to be. The big thing for us is we have really good belief in our hardware. So we look at our package, we look at what we currently have in terms of the hull shape, the foils, and the sails. So they're the 3 things that add up all together to your boat speed. And we're confident that we've got the hardware to go and be very competitive next week and beyond. And the other thing we look at is where we're going to be in a month's time, where it really matters, when we're in the Prada Cup. And with the additions to some key hardware that we've got coming online over the Christmas period, we're very confident. Now, saying that, the learning curve is very steep for us, as it is with all teams. And I look at the group that I work within, the sailing team, and I see how we're working well with the design team and really ramping up the hardware that we've got. I am confident that we're going to have a really good run of it next week, and then fingers crossed into the new year. I think there's 2 more days of kind of unofficial or official practice before we go into the World Series. So yeah, it's going to be a big beginning to next week, but that's nothing we're not used to. You know, we sailed 5 days out of 7 last week, put 1,000 kilometers in the bag. So just get the old arm spinning again, I guess.
I guess if nothing else, you've given them a little bit of a rest there, haven't you, Freddie?
Yeah,
when you're working so hard as a grinder, what is it like when that boat's flying across the waves at 50 knots, 60 miles an hour? What is it like for you?
Do you know, it's unbelievable. So we obviously do a lot of physical conditioning. We do 15 hours of grinding a week in the gym. So actually, when you come out to grind on the water, it can be a little bit easier. You have to be very aware of your effort level, because if you push too hard and go and blow yourself up, you actually stop sailing the boat very well. You have to be very dialed into your numbers and what's going to happen around the race course. It's a lot of fun. it's a lot of fun. I can't get past that. It's the thrill of a lifetime, and I feel absolutely privileged to sail and race on these boats and work with the group that I'm working with. So yeah, it's brilliant.
That's fantastic. We're certainly excited and looking forward to seeing you and the team out there on the waves. A reminder to all the viewers at home, you can see all the action from New Zealand and see how Team Ineos and Freddie get on from next Thursday morning, 2 a.m. UK time on Sky Sports Mix. We will be showing replays throughout the day as well for those of you that perhaps aren't quite able to make it for that time. But Freddie, we wish you the best of luck. Hope it goes well, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard. Take care.